TellyCast, the TV industry news review.
Hi, I'm Justin Crosby, and welcome to the last TellyCast of 2020. This week, I chat with hugely experienced media consultant and former network executive, Jeff Ford. Girts Licis looks at the way that local broadcasters are standing their ground against the streaming invasion. Deadline's TV editor Peter White reflects on the most popular stories of the year and looks ahead to the biggest US TV shows in development in 2021. And career coach and wellbeing expert Tracy Forsyth walks us through her 12 wellbeing tips of Christmas at the end of an extraordinary year. It's all coming up on this week's TellyCast. Before we start this week's show, I wanted to say thanks very much for listening to TellyCast this year. The show's now been downloaded over 10,000 times, and we've got listeners in 32 countries worldwide and counting. Thanks also to my guests this year. We've had some amazing contributors who've come on the show and shared their insights and opinions. We've got some big name guests coming on the show in January and some big plans for the next year. So please make sure you subscribe and share TellyCast on social media. And also a quick reminder to sign up for TellyCast Plus, our brand new newsletter containing my picks for stories of the week, interesting charts, rumours, execs for hire, and all sorts of other interesting TV industry stuff from around the web you may have missed this week. It's completely free. Just sign up at telecast-podcast.com. That's telecast-podcast.com. And it'll drop into your email inbox every Friday. You'll also find a link for it in the episode description. So sign up now and we'll see you in your inbox every Friday. So my first guest this week is Jeff Ford. Jeff's had a career in TV spanning 4 decades as an acquisitions executive. His roles in TV have included Director of Programmes at Channel 5, Director of Acquisitions for Channel 4 and Film 4, Director of Content at Islands TV3, and MD of the UK and SVP Content Development at Fox Networks Group. So, welcome to the show, media consultant and former network executive, Jeff Ford. How are you doing, Jeff?
Hello, Justin. Not too bad, thank you. Thank you for having me on the show. Very strange world at the moment. I'm trying to live through it. That's all I'm trying to do. Like most people, just trying to live through it.
We've nearly got to the end of 2020. You know, well done us for that.
I think congratulations are in order. Get the champagne. Where's the champagne?
Exactly. How's your 2020 been then?
Well, it's an interesting one because obviously I'm probably luckier than a lot of people who may well be listening is that I actually don't work full time because I sort of retired a couple of years ago. But like all those bad spy movies, I got brought back in. You never quite leave the organisation, do you? And this 2020, this year, I've actually been working on a couple of drama projects. One is sort of its early days, and it's not really for sort of a conversation. But the other one is, and I've been working with a company called Aftershock, and they actually are content owners. They have a lot of IP in graphic novels. And what I've been doing in this last year is actually speaking to a lot of broadcasters, some talent, independents, to sort of see if they're actually interested in taking on some of the IP that we have in these graphic novels, and seeing if they want to sort of produce it. So it's been really interesting because a lot of people sort of don't look at graphic novels in the same way as they do normal novels, historical novels, or whatever novels they are. It's a sort of it's something they don't quite understand, even though it's a written word, and actually it's visual and it's like a storyboard. So all the elements of it actually are quite good for media people. We've got about 3. I think I've got to touch wood again when I'm saying this, but about three independents who are really quite interested and very close, I think, to getting agreements with to develop some of the IP. So it's been actually in a terrible year. It's actually been pretty good from on that front to actually take it from zero to to somewhere better. And of course, lots of decorating is probably the other thing, and gardening.
Yes.
Like most people probably.
Well, there's been an awful lot of development done, hasn't there, this year? Let's face it, particularly in the drama world. So it'll be interesting to see the result of that next year. And well, I wish you all the best with that project. Interestingly, anime as well and graphic novels and that whole area is got a very, very strong genre fan base, hasn't it? It'll be interesting to see how that develops. And we've just seen Sony buy Crunchyroll only last week. So it's a fertile area.
It's a fertile area. You're absolutely right. I think the thing is what we always try and say, at Aftershock, as you can tell, I've been swallowing the old their magic potion. Is that even if it's a graphic novel, and you're absolutely right, there's a lot of fans, but we mustn't think of it as being niche. It's not actually. It isn't niche. It's actually quite broad. Look at I'll do the old quotation of The Walking Dead. What came from a graphic novel. I think that there's only about 7,000 readers who bought the magazine before it went to TV, and I think after it went to TV, there was only about 8,000 people who got the magazine. So it's about taking something that is a great idea and then adapting it for television or adapting it for film or any other platform. It's interesting how you've got to ensure that you know that the idea isn't small, and it can be expanded into a bigger screen.
Yeah, and a good story is a good story at the end of the day. And
good story is a good story. Absolutely right. Absolutely right, Justin.
So we've seen a whole load of changes, obviously, in the TV industry over the past 12 months. Some were changes that we saw coming and they've really been put on steroids, but perhaps others we may not have predicted. Now, you've been in the industry for over 4 decades. How do you see this year for the content industry in the context of all the changes you've seen over the course of your career?
Thank you for making me sound very old. 4 decades. It's lovely to be welcomed on this show and shown up for being an old man. So that's fine. But don't worry, Justin. Everything is good. I haven't turned you off yet. I think the pandemic hasn't helped in terms of change anyway. And I think you can look at the pandemic as being a cultural and a sociological shift as well, in terms of how we look at work, how in going to work. We don't go to work anymore. We are at home working and we're on Zoom all the time and we don't go out, and we want to watch television a lot more than we used to, but there are so many platforms to watch. So all these things have actually changed culturally, but changed actually the way we work and the things we watch. But it's funny how you say about over the 4 decades, how it has changed. And I mean, interesting, I think it always has been change. I think it's probably the one constant that we've had, probably certainly in the last 30 years. I mean, I think sometimes you have to look at it as being change or opportunity. And I think those can be good things, and I think, I think I've been quite lucky in my career, and maybe just to sort of touch on a little bit on both those points. I started in TV in 1977. ITV, they said ITV had a license to print money. There was only BBC One, BBC Two, and ITV, and ITV wasn't even called ITV One. It was on Channel 3 if you turned your dial and all that sort of thing. And I had a job at the BBC in Windmill Road. And Windmill Road doesn't exist anymore. It's now a block of, I think it's flats, very nice flats as well, looking over Brentford. But then, 1982, you had Channel 4 came along, and it was a huge change and a huge shift in terms of what television was and what people could see and what the offering was. And I was trying to get a job in the acquired department at the BBC. In that time, in the early 80s, were quite old-fashioned in terms of employment. I'd never been to university, and basically it was because I think the old school tie, and I wasn't quite the right person, and they didn't think I was the right person for that particular job. I couldn't sort of escape my role at the BBC that I had in my parent department, and so therefore that whole thing of like social mobility, or that whole thing didn't sort of really exist. I'm not saying poor me or anything, but it was. I had a little bit of sort of experience of what that actually meant at the BBC. And it seemed to me that, I had to almost escape the BBC, I think, to see and try and grow my career. And in sort of 1988, I got a job at Anglia Television. So I moved my family to Norwich because somebody retired. So, that was a bit of luck really for me. Not so much for him, but it's good luck for me. The following year, all of a sudden, satellite television launches. So what a shift, what a change there was there, where Sky and BSB that were there, and how it changed the landscape. Explosion of channels. You've got cable, you've got the flex text, more opportunities for indies. The distribution world sort of saw dollar signs, pound signs. Then went out to Yorkshire Television in 1989 when the chap who was doing my job passed away. I started to be in places. I was very, very lucky and managed to sort of find those opportunities where as change was happening. In 1992, I know this sounds like a history lesson, but try and stay awake at the back. The ITV franchises all got thrown up in the air, and Thames Television lost their franchise. Probably one of the most influential producers of television programs, or of a company, a broadcaster. They were just kicked to one side, and Carlton came on and took over. There was that whole worry about how would Carlton do. And actually, I got a job at Carlton because the chap who lost his job at Thames, and therefore I had the opportunity at Carlton. And the Network Centre was created. And that was another, again, whole raft of jobs, a whole raft of opportunities for people. And it seemed at that particular time where everything then seemed to be growing. Everything seemed to be moving outwards, from a personal level where I was sort of doing all right. But also there seemed to be far more opportunities than there had been in the past. When you had just, 1977, there was only the BBC and ITV. And now you've got this plethora of channels and you've got all these things going on. And it was a very exciting time. Once that franchise round sort of happened, then you had the whole thing of ITV companies merging. And therefore, all of a sudden, it started, everybody was saying, we need now to save money because there's more pressure, there's more competition. Viewing is fragmenting, and we need to be able to save our money. And all of a sudden, you started seeing this merging of companies, the swallowing of franchises, this whole thing about savings started to really influence the market. But then all amongst this sort of 1997, Channel 5 then came along. New opportunity. I chased Dawn Airy all over Cannes to get a job there at Channel 5, and I finally caught up with her. She didn't run very fast. So again, more opportunity for everybody. Really interesting that was. I got another job then at Channel 4 with Kevin Ligo. At that particular time, you're sort of having changes of rights and who owns those rights. Broadcasters always used to own rights almost forever in perpetuity. And now indies are sort of saying, no, hang on a minute. We've produced these shows. We want these rights. So the whole thing about that relationship between broadcaster and independent then started to change. And then broadcasters wanted to create their own content and own their own content. Then the whole thing about buying indies as well, that started to sort of think about. And then they've got the whole change in viewing and rights with pay-per-view and VOD, and then digital channels, and then catch-up. I remember when I was at Channel 4 doing the first catch-up deal for a major acquired show, which was Desperate Housewives. And it was like groundbreaking. Nobody ever done it before. Oh, my God, is this the end of the world? Well, obviously it wasn't. But on top of that, it was all about, well, how can you see these shows? You're going to have catch-up. You don't just want them to be seen on the big screen. You've got to see them on the second screen and on the smartphones and all other platforms. All this sort of magical world that didn't exist began to exist. Then as this fragmentation is happening, you've got more viewing figures being under pressure. And then in 2009, where I sort of returned to Channel 5, and that's when I became director of programs under Richard Desmond. And then you've got, the SVOD, the OTT platforms, the YouTube, Netflix, all making their own inroads into their opportunities and into people's homes, into viewing. But it doesn't sort of stop there. Even when I went to Ireland to work at TV3 in 2013, and I was director of content there, UTV Ireland started. So even when I thought, okay, I might get 5 minutes rest, or, as the world continues to change, UTV Ireland launched, and what they did was they bought all the ITV content. And therefore, so it had TV3 not having any of the ITV content anymore, and UTV Ireland having all of it. And so even in this little island of Ireland, it was an absolute horror and absolute war about would TV3 survive with this UTV Island coming down from the north into the south. Well, of course, it did. And actually UTV Island went bust in the end, and sort of, the status quo sort of came back. But that was an unbelievable shift in a small island where there was hardly any money, and they'd just gone through had the Celtic Tiger, and then you had all the sort of the stock markets fall, and all that was influencing in the background. And so it continues. And then I went to Fox in 2015, and then you've got Disney buying Fox, and then you've got Universal buying Sky. And then I thought, sod it, I'm retiring. I've had enough.
You've certainly been there and experienced, as you say, you've experienced change all the way through your career. So I guess, in the context of that, 2020 is not been that much change going on, has there?
It still continues. And I think that the whole thing of you're seeing the whole distribution end changing, where there's this whole thing of ownership of content. People like Warner's and Disney and Universal having their own platforms. And because at the end of the day, they've got to try and beat Netflix. And I remember being in a meeting, and I'm not going to say where it was, but I was in a meeting, and it was all about who's going to be the last platform standing. Almost kill or be killed. And there is this whole sort of attitude of you've actually now got to survive, and how can you survive? And I think this is the thing about, and it's actually, maybe it's a metaphor for 2020 on the whole, of actually survival and the survival of the fittest. I mean, the great thing about it, there is fantastic content out there if you can find it, and that's always a problem, and it has been a problem, I think.
Well, that's another thing, isn't it? Aggregation, and we touched on that last week, but that's probably something for another show. But yeah, absolutely, there's more great content out there than ever before, and as you say, we've entered into a phase of survival of the fittest.
Although you say there's a lot of great content out there, there's also, because there's a lot of content, there's a lot of content. There's a lot of also content that isn't very good. Having an editorial view, I think, for brands, channels, platforms, or whatever, is so key. You'll be able to guide people to those shows and to the shows they want. My only issue, I think, is, and a negative, I suppose, is the concern of, we all hear about the algorithm, and this is what you might want to watch and all that sort of stuff. And I think it is useful. I mean, all tools are useful, because if if it says, you liked Toast of London, for instance, you're going to like X, Y, and Z, and that's great. But I think the trouble is, of course, is that it doesn't tell you what you might want to like. Even when I was at 5, when we were commissioning, you can say, bring me this, but you don't want people to bring you that. You want to bring you something like it, but round the edges. You want to be surprised. You want to be intrigued. You don't want to have exactly what you want. Because if you have exactly what you want, it's a very narrow thing. You have to be very careful about those sort of things, I think. When you are asking for those shows, you do leave yourself room to expand. It may be about just cutting the edges off where you certainly don't want stuff, but do not be too sort of prescriptive on absolutely what you do want.
Over the course of your career, I mean, you've been in content acquisition leadership roles, as you touched on, for ITV, Channel 5, Channel 4, TV3 Ireland, Fox Networks. Looking at them now and this survival of the fittest approach, how prepared do you think those channels are for the next 5 years?
Well, I think if you're talking about acquisitions, I think some are better placed than others, because some have a different reliance on acquisitions than others. But it's all about the studios also and their strategy about what they're going to allow people to have. And I think that's an interesting one. And of course, is how much broadcasters will be prepared, or platforms will be prepared to buy that content if it is available. There was a time, and it's that time is probably still now, is where acquisitions can cost an absolute fortune and can cost as much as a commission or more. Acquired shows always used to be the ones that you could buy, and they would help fund your commissions. It sort of changed, and there was a whole time where acquisitions, were 10 figures to buy per episode. That, I think, has probably gone a long time ago, but they are still expensive because the competition is so rife. But it's all about what those studios are doing and what they're going to allow, I think, in the future. for those platforms to have. But of course, you divide it down into, is it theatricals? Do you mean series? I think we're still seeing what studios are going to do on the acquisition front. Acquisitions aren't as important as they used to be. But if you're running a movie channel, for instance, it certainly is. So Sky, I'm sure, are looking at what everybody else is doing, and that's why they want to bring in things like Disney Plus into their sort of on Sky Q or whatever it'll be, to ensure that they have got those supplies. Because supply is very important when you're running a business that is reliant totally on acquisitions.
So we've seen lots of networks around the world pivoting to digital over the last couple of months. Many senior execs have exited, and these businesses are really looking to embrace this new digital world. Some may say, a bit late, but anyway. But you've got these huge networks looking to digital, and the role of channel commissioner now seems to be endangered. What do you think that means for the type of program that's going to get commissioned over the next few years?
It's an interesting one, this. I think it really comes into focus, I think, when you sort of look at what the BBC are probably planning to do. Their change of emphasis, isn't it, really, to sort of, it's to fit their content into their broader digital plans more than sort of looking at channels individually. And I think you've got to say, it's right, but I think, but I think most big ships, I think, need captains, and I know when they sort of say, well, you're going to get rid of, the controllers of these channels. It's one of those things. It's timing, and is it a little bit previous? I think genre heads, which is where sort of what seems to be taking over at the Beeb, because I obviously work with a lot of genre heads. I always think they want to commission their shows. I think that whole double tick thing, which we always used to have at 5, it's very useful to have, because if you're just doing a one tick process and you're saying, oh, I like this show, I want to get this show, without sort of running it past somebody who's sort of slightly more independent of thought, I think is a sort of slightly dangerous thing. And I know they're going to have, portfolio editors, I think, and hopefully that will be that almost a double tick. I worry that without having that sort of questioning is a concern. That's my only thing. I think it's the right strategy, but don't forget also the BBC One and BBC Two, Bit 4, and all the channels that this is affecting still have lots of viewers who do want to watch linear shows, and I think that's also a very, very important thing. And you mustn't. Don't throw baby out with the bathwater. Again, I've got an older-fashioned view because I'm 60. Well, actually, I'm 61, but I tell everyone I'm 60.
Well, you're probably the ideal, age for a BBC One viewer, aren't you?
Well, I am, and I do wear a dress on the odd occasion. So I'm more sort of ITV, 55 plus older female.
Right.
Like me and Grayson Perry. Or Grayson Perry and I, should I say? But I think that's the whole thing. I think I think they're absolutely right. But I worry about the captain of the ship, and I think that you do have to have somebody who sometimes makes those decisions. And as long as that sort of reference is in place, I think it's fine. I've worked with people who would just go, "Oh, we'll commission all of this stuff because I think they're great," and then you have to worry about the finance of it and that sort of thing. So there's always going to have to be a decision about what's the higher priority on your list. If of the 10 things you really want to get, that you can only commission 5. Or does it come down to financials? I mean, it's a question of that, and I think that's it's. So I don't think I probably know enough about what the BBC's plans are and how people will do this, but I think it's right. But I think it has to be very, very, very carefully done. I think, and to ensure that viewers or customers or consumers actually don't get a bum deal.
Now, before we move on from networks and channels, I just wanted to ask you about Channel 5. And your time at Channel 5,
Yes.
You were working for Richard Desmond.
I was.
Anybody that's had Richard Desmond as a boss has probably got a lot of stories. What was he like to work with?
Well, actually, it's a strange one because I was going to say most of my after-dinner speaking is regarding this particular point, but I don't do any after-dinner speaking at all. But if I did, that's what I'd be probably employed to do. But no, actually, it's a strange one because people always are thinking, here we go, rubbing their hands together. We're going to hear some juicy gossip. But the thing about Richard is he was actually quite easy in the end to work with and work for, because Richard knew what he wanted, and he actually liked television. He was one of these people who actually did watch TV. So he wasn't just talking about things that he didn't get, or he wasn't a viewer. He was a viewer, and he actually therefore thought, oh, I like that program. I like this program. So when you sort of, when Big Brother has the opportunity to come on, he goes, I know about that show. I want to get it. Why don't we try and get it? Let's do it. Looking back, I actually look back with quite a lot of warmth of that particular time. I think also I've got to say that he gave me probably the biggest job I ever had, which was, director of programs at Channel 5. And I'll be eternally grateful for him giving me that opportunity. And to also, at that particular time, where the channel had been going, steadily downhill because of just the way it was, and the sales market and all that sort of stuff. And it was really poor. And I think we were really, I gave me an opportunity to actually almost, I'm not going to say resurrect because that's a bit too theatrical and a bit too much, but an opportunity to steady the ship and point it in the right direction. So we were actually going up as opposed to going down. If I was in a pub and Richard turned up, I would actually say, I'd be actually quite happy to say hello and welcoming in and that sort of thing. If you could obviously go to a pub. Obviously I can't do because I'm in tier 3 now.
I'm not going to get one of these boardroom stories, am I, out of you, Jeff?
No.
Right. Okay. All right. Well,
that is over a Scotch egg.
Yes. Okay. All right. Looking at the production side, if you sort of took off your commissioner hat and put on a producer hat, and if you were a producer today, in light of all of these changes that are happening, what would be your strategy to sell your shows in today's industry?
I think you've already touched on something which is always the best thing. It is, look, it's about good ideas. It's about fresh ideas. It's about new ideas. It's also about knowing what platform that you should be talking to about your ideas. Platforms, aren't really as important, or supposedly as important, but I think they still have a position. At the end of the day, having that editorial voice, people can understand editorial voices, and they have their favorite brands, and they have their favorite brands. If it's a shoe or it's whatever it is, they know what that thing offers. So I think whenever you're having whenever you want to, when you're ever trying to sell a show or put, I think you do need to know where it's going to go. I don't think there's anything particularly new in this at all. I think you have to be sort of flexible. It's difficult with money these days. It's always difficult with money any day, I think, really. I'm always was a commercial beast. Even when I was at Channel 4, I always tried to be. And I think part of the thing that's an important strategy you must have, I think really, if you want something that's going to go on forever, is something that's returnable. I think people really like having that returnable show. Character-led. It may have, obviously, character-led in a drama is easy, but also character-led factually. In terms of factual entertainment, I think people want something they can attach to. Again, this is not brain surgery, and luckily for me and people, if they are my patients, it isn't brain surgery. It's a really lovely thing to be in. It's a really fun environment.
What are the best tips you've got for a pitch, for a producer coming into a commissioner for a pitch? Give me your do's and don'ts for the right way and the wrong way to pitch.
When you're going for a pitch, I think you need to be, you need to know who you're speaking to. That's back to this brand thing. You need to know who that channel is, what they stand for, what their audiences are, what they're looking for. So understand all those elements before you get in. You only need to have 3 or 4 good pitches. You don't want to have, say, oh, that one doesn't work. Okay, I've got another one. And then you're there for 2 hours going through all these ideas. So it's all about ensuring that you have a very tight pitch. You can, and you want to generate excitement. You don't want to be leaving it, dull. You don't want to be dragging the meeting at all. It's really common sense, half of this stuff. Like anything you want to go, you want to be prepped for it. You want to know who they are. You want to know what they like. You want to know what they've commissioned and what they're looking for. Simple, straightforward, hasn't changed. And still, to be perfectly honest, people don't do it. They still get it wrong. And when I was even in my last job at Fox, which was only a few years ago, people would come in and just clamber on all this stuff, and you just think this has got nothing to do with this channel at all. You think, you actually say, well, have you watched Fox?
Do your homework, basically.
Know your subject, know who you're speaking to, and try and relate it to things that they're doing. and also be prepared to not have too many ideas there, but to say, right, we'll take some of these learnings back and we'll come back to you in a little while with some more ideas if we find them appropriate, or supporting stuff, the stuff that we've given you.
Now, if you were starting out in the industry afresh today,
Yes.
who would you want to work for and why?
Well, I think anybody would have me these days, I think. There are so many places to go. But in some instances, I think these days you almost have to rely slightly on yourself a bit more than you had in the past. Because I think, there are so many one-man bands. There are so many things that you can do. The training you used to get at the Beeb, for instance, years ago, I think doesn't probably exist as much as it did, or it's just in a different way. Again, it depends where you want to be in your career. Are you going more digital? Do you want to go into production? Or even in the IT department for a broadcaster or platform? There are lots of opportunities, but you need to know what you want to do. But I think you have to rely on yourself far more now than you'd have ever done, just because there's loads more companies, but sometimes there's not so many people about in those companies.
I didn't get an answer there, Jeff. Who would you like to most work for?
Who would I like to work for now? And the trouble is, I'm knowing what I know now. So I'd probably say ITV.
Okay.
Look, I'm a traditionalist, so and I'm come through all these things, and I know what ITV is about, and I know all its brand values. But I know Kevin Lygo. I loved working for him at Channel 5, and I love working for him at Channel 4. And he is also a person who just, you love him. You can't help but feel a great affection for Kevin if you work for him. I think he's actually probably got more followers than Jesus. I mean, I think so. He's one of those sort of people who absolutely, you really do love Kevin, and you'd go to the ends of the earth to try and to work for him. But in terms of, that's a sort of almost like, I just want to work for ITV, Kevin. But in terms of how I do it and how I would get into ITV, I think this would be a really interesting question. And I probably don't know the answer to that, because I think it's a really tough to know what you want to do and how to do it. And that's why almost you have to rely, I think, on yourself to give yourself the training, the strength, and know what you want to do. The other thing, of course, is that, if you can have a mentor when you do get into these places, mentoring schemes are also quite important, I think, in broadcasters, and people being able to give people time. When I was certainly, actually throughout a lot of my time, is if anybody said, look, can I come and see you for half an hour and have a chat about stuff? I would always be willing to have a conversation with anybody. People did it when I was first started. People did it with me. And I think you have to say, I have to give that time up. You have to just sort of say, we're all busy, I know, but do you know what? These are people and you want to help them, and they'll remember what you did for them, and they will do it for other people as well. And I think so. Mentoring, I think, doesn't really answer your question. I sort of have it, I suppose, in a way, but I think that it's a different way of how we need to train ourselves and be prepared in certain jobs. And I always so thankful for those people who looked after me, and hopefully the people who I've given time to, I've given them something to help with their careers.
So now it's time for Story of the Week, where my guests get to highlight the TV industry news that's caught their eye in the past 7 days. Jeff, what's your story of the week?
The story about Warner Brothers and moving all their next year's, all their theatrical releases onto their HBO Max platform on the same day that their movies will hit theatres. And I think it's a sort of a groundbreaking or ground shifting or ground moving event. I know Christopher Nolan's said something about this, and sort of, his films are made for the big screen, and it's disgraceful that that Warner Brothers have made this decision. It's all about their business model, and it's all about back to that almost that last man standing. Warner's, I think, are in an interesting place because they are a superpower in terms of their movies, but they're not in comparison with somebody like Disney. Disney Plus, has gone through the roof, and they've got millions of subscribers. They're playing with this tactic of dropping movies here and there, and I think the next Pixar is going to be a a Disney Plus only release, and there's some they're going to share with theatrical and Disney Plus. I think that's because they are in a different place. I think in a different place to Warner's. But what it does, as I say, it shifts the earth and of that whole thing of theatrical windows, that whole thing of people going to the cinema, which I do worry about. Because the only thing is, it's again that part of our behaviour and part of our culture. I know it's a modern culture and it's only been going for 100 years or so, or 120 years, but it is part of how we view film, which is only 120 years old, and not to be able to go to the cinema and see films in the big screen, I think would be a bad thing. Now, it's not going to end. This world is not going to end in 3 years' time, but it's a big change. It is a business play of it trying to be the biggest, the best, and to kill the opposition off. And the only way they can do it is have this platform on HBO Max, because they need to have more viewers onto that platform, and therefore they think this is the best way to do it. I mean, it's funny at the moment. Of course, you've got Amazon and Netflix who use theatres as marketing tools because they've got so many of these big movies that they're doing, or big star vehicles. They want people to come to the theatre so they can actually see the film, understand what Netflix and Amazon's all about, and therefore sign up. Everybody's using it for slightly different motives at the moment. It would be very disappointing if theatres end. I really wouldn't like that to happen, but I don't think it's going to happen now or for a long, long time. But it is that sort of thin end of the wedge,
yeah.
And I would hate to see cinemas go the way of so many other things like the Dodo.
Yeah. Well, they've actually said there's 17 films affected for 2021, starting with Wonder Woman 1984 this Christmas. And they've said that, they may review it in future, but obviously there's a whole load of opposition out there from the Directors Guild of America, Christopher Nolan, you mentioned, Judd Apatow, Aaron Sorkin. I mean, the whole of the industry and agents and talent, obviously, because they get recompensed on the back end of the success of films in theatres. And obviously, we know streamers don't really share their performance statistics with anybody. Obviously, the question here is, what's the value of a film to talent and to the industry? And obviously, we also know that theatrical chains like AMC are in real trouble. And I think they've only gotten cash reserves until the end of January. It's been reported as well. It's certainly an interesting time to be in that side of the business. Let's see how that plays out over the next few months.
It's about points that the directors or the actors have. And it's interesting that Warner's did that without any real reference, or seemingly any reference, to their major talent. If you want your major talent to leave you, that's a great way of doing it.
A bold move, and perhaps something that's come from the ultimate owners of the business.
I think you're absolutely right.
That don't necessarily understand the symbiotic relationship that's been developed over decades. We'll see, and we'll also see how it affects HBO Max, which has had a bit of a slow start, I believe, in America. Let's see how it develops and keep our eyes on that story as it rolls through the year. And now it's time for my guests to nominate their hero of the week and who or what they want to tell to get in the bin. Come on, Jeff, who's your hero of the week?
I'm actually still sticking a little bit with Warner's, strangely enough. You'll understand why, because this chap who I'm going to sort of nominate as my hero is a man called Peter Roth. And I don't know how many people know who Peter Roth is in terms of the UK. I think people who've gone to the LA screenings in May to see all the new pilots and had that experience will know Peter Roth. Peter is the sort of chairman and chief executive officer of Warner Brothers Television Studios, which is a wonderful title. And he's had it since 1989, and next year he will be stepping down. So he's been there for a very long time. Peter started as an American, US TV producer. But the thing about him, over his career or over his span where he's been at Warner Brothers that length of time, he's created or been part of that creation of either through development or producing or actually getting that show made, supporting the producer who wants it, but getting it through into Warner Brothers studios. Some of the best shows that we all know and love, things like ER, The Mentalist, West Wing, Friends, Without a Trace, Big Bang, Vampire Diaries, and it's had 32 primetime scripted series that have gone to over 100 episodes. This chap is phenomenal. When we used to go to the LA screenings, when he went to Warner's for their upfronts, as they used to call it, and their sort of presentation, Warner Brothers always used to say every year that the previous year they had been number one in this, number one in that. And Jeff Schlesinger, who was the president of Warner Brothers, another great guy who's stepped down as well, he used to just revel in the fact that Warner Brothers had all these number ones, all these plaudits, all these great things that they'd done. And it was all because Peter Roth's magic and the way he could find these shows or bring people on and bring producers in. Because him going, I think, is really quite sad in terms of how he was able to influence modern culture in terms of all these wonderful shows that he made. I mean, obviously, particularly for the American market, but also for us over here. And some of these shows, like British shows that produced, really do mean something to people, or they start them off in a direction of what they want to do in their career and how they do stuff. I mean, when I was 9, I watched Columbo and thought, I want to buy shows for the British market. That's because I saw it on telly and I thought that's the job I wanted to do, and then I did it. So these shows are really interesting. Even if it's ER, people might say, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a nurse, or whatever it is. I think they are amazing pieces of drama, and this man has been responsible for some of the best. And I think he's my hero because it was only announced the other week that he was stepping down. And I think he's certainly one of the top guys of American television over the last 30 years. All
right. And who are you going to tell to get in the bin?
Well, I think this is an easy one, Justin, apart from yourself. Right. Obviously, because, I don't like you either. No, the thing I really want, and I'm sure somebody's done this. So if they have, stop me. Well, actually, if they have, don't stop me because I haven't got anything else.
Don't say COVID.
I'm not going to say COVID. No, I'm not. I was going to say COVID, but I changed my mind because I want to actually just put the whole of 2020 in. Can I do that?
Yes.
Can I say 2020? And I'll tell you why. Because 2020 has been back to this whole life on hold. Yes, that was COVID. But also, of course, we've got our lovely Brexit that has helped us maintain the status quo and do absolutely bugger all in terms of our lives and how people getting on. Everything is on hold. And I've hated 2020 for that. Everything has changed, as we've been sort of talking about, in terms of people don't go into work, that whole social thing, seeing people, touching people, which I know you're not supposed to do these days. But I think you know what I mean, in terms of hugging people, hugging family, hugging friends and seeing friends and going for a drink with people, and just that social intercourse, that whole contact sport that we have of actually just being touchy-feely creatures. And I think it's been awful for that. And also because 2020 has been a shit year for people who have died as well. And not just in terms of people in that horrible, ever-growing 65,000 people who have died of COVID across the year, which is awful. But also people who I've worked with and friends who have died as well. And so, in terms of 2020, it's that saying, I just want it to be over so we can actually look forward to a better year and a happier year, and hopefully not the disaster that it's been, really.
Yeah, quite right. Well, that's a fitting note to end on, Jeff. Thank you. Let's put 2020 in the bin. I think a lot of us will agree with that. Let's hope we emerge blinking into the sunlight of 2021 when spring comes, and we can look forward to better days. So,
you're such a romantic.
That's what they all say. Jeff, thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciated your time on the show this week. Have a great Christmas and a great break. Hopefully, we'll see you on the Quasset at some point in the near future.
Well, Justin, thank you again. I've really enjoyed it. It's the first time I've spoken to anybody else for about 8 months. So thank you for that. And I look forward also to being on the Quasset and visiting the bars of said Rue.
All right. We'll see you there.
Okay. Take care. Cheers all.
And so for the last time in 2020, we're going over to Hollywood to speak to Peter White from Deadline. Peter, how are you? Merry Christmas, as it nearly is.
Hey, Justin. Yeah, I'm good. Nice to speak to you. I'll be honest. When you started doing this back at the start of the pandemic, I didn't think I'd still be on your podcast in December.
No. Well, that's it. That's one of the many surprises we've had this year. I didn't know whether I'd still be doing it. Certainly didn't think I'd be entering into lockdown again for the second time. And that's the same for you over in LA again. You're under some strict lockdown restrictions again.
Yeah, it feels like the US and the UK are sort of trading blows in terms of who goes first. We're under a stay-at-home order. It doesn't really make any difference. It's sort of how we've been living the last 9 months or so, really. Some of the restaurants and bars are shut, but on the whole, it's been pretty similar. I must say, not to rub it in, the sun is still shining.
Yeah. Well, it says something for the year, doesn't it? The fact that we're actually locked down and we're just, accepting it as if it's kind of a usual sort of thing. The fact is we're all under almost house arrest. It is a very weird time, but spring is coming. Equinox is about to happen. It's going to start getting lighter. The vaccine's coming.
I'm looking forward to getting a needle in my arm, and so I can go back to licking doorknobs soon.
Yes, exactly. As we're at the end of the year, I thought I'd ask you about, what are your key stories of the year that you've seen covering the industry over in LA this year? What are the 5 stories that you've seen at Deadline which you think have been the most interesting?
Yeah, so I went back and crunched some data on terms of our site stats. I'm going to preface this by saying these aren't necessarily the biggest stories. You can imagine we've written quite a lot about Donald Trump this year. We've written a lot about COVID. And a few other sort of weird stories that sit outside of that. So these are sort of the traditional TV stories, I guess, that have really done the numbers for us. The first one I thought was interesting in so much that it had talked to a wider trend is the reboot of Dexter. It was up there in terms of our biggest stories of the year. Michael C. Hall back to playing the serial killer, doing a reboot of the Showtime series. But I thought what was even bigger than that was actually you look at Hollywood now, and this is a trend that's been going on for a few months or a few years, is just the reboot culture. Pretty much anything that lived on television or film in some form over the last 50 years is now being rebooted. And I think that's something that's obviously going to continue. Even shows that weren't necessarily that big to begin with. I'm not saying that about Dexter, but a lot of things. Any bit of IP is incredibly valuable. It essentially means that you've got a jump start on marketing. Look, this year we've seen announcements on shows like Gossip Girl coming back. In treatment, on the non-scripted side, you've got Who Do You Think You Are and Wipeout. There's a new Battlestar Galactica. Some details about the new Blood came out. There's talk of even True Detective and things like that. Pretty much anything that ever existed in the entertainment business seems to be on the development list somewhere.
Yeah, well, it's like sequel culture, isn't it? It's TV's answer to sort of Toy Story 5 or wherever we're up to now. But Dexter is interesting because that's a decade after the last season finished.
Yeah, 2013. If you remember, I didn't follow the whole season, the whole show, but that final season was quite controversial. I think quite a few Dexter fans were a little bit disappointed with how it ended. So it will be fascinating to see how they pick that up. Showtime said, they've got a good idea. Clyde Phillips and Michael C. Hall have got an idea how to bring it back. But that's it. How do you bring these shows back? And the one that I'm still waiting for, crossing my fingers at some point is The West Wing. That's one of my favorite shows of all time, and whether that can come back. Aaron Sorkin has said if they come up with an idea for it, then they might. So I'm still holding out for that one.
That would be fantastic. And we haven't seen the much vaunted Friends reunion, have we yet? There was going to be some sort of get-together, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was going to be a reunion special, essentially. It's funny, isn't it? Because that was going to be the big HBO Max launch title that they didn't end up making yet. They will be. You say that, I guarantee you there will be a Friends reboot at some point in the future. Whether it's next year is unlikely, but you can very much imagine down the line that they will try and do that.
Well, that's it. You can imagine Apple buying Netflix and that being the key titles in 2025.
Quite.
What else have you seen this year that's been interesting?
So the cancellation of Live PD was also a big drive of traffic to Deadline this year. Quite a big show for A&E. It was their flagship show, really. Aired hundreds of hours across the network. What was really interesting about that was, the timing of it come about. If you remember, it was essentially pulled in the wake of George Floyd's murder, and it wasn't directly tied, obviously, but the police and how that is portrayed on television is a subject that's really in the spotlight at the moment. There was a bit of controversy around that. There was a Javier Ambler was someone on. They'd been filmed on the show, and the videos had been destroyed, but was captured by the crew. There was a bit of controversy about that. Cops was also pulled. Television essentially reassessed how it portrayed police on television in the wake of Mr. Floyd's death. So I thought that was really interesting. There's talk that they're going to try and bring it back in some form, or how they do that. But what we'll see on the scripted side as well, and we're starting to hear this, is a lot of these shows are trying to deal with how they portray the police on television, because it's not quite as simple as it was this time last year.
Things are obviously seem to have polarized in lots of different directions in the US over this last election cycle. So it'd be interesting to see what a lasting impact that has on entertainment decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, talking of entertainment decisions, we broke a big story back in October, another cancellation story, doom and gloom, it seems for me, but there's more positive to come, I promise. Glow was cancelled, but it wasn't just so much that it was cancelled, it was that, essentially a decision on its renewal had been reversed because of COVID. They had been renewed for another season, and because of the coronavirus, it sort of became a casualty, essentially. A lot of fans were upset at that. It wasn't going to return for its fourth and final season. And I think that was, there was a few more in the wake of that. There was a few other shows that came out of that. On Becoming a God in Central Florida, which was the Kirsten Dunst series from Showtime, which I really enjoyed. Stumptown, which was an ABC show. All of these shows that essentially the networks had blamed on COVID hitting them. So that was something, in the wake of the pandemic, we saw a bit of that. And also, Netflix cancelling shows. Netflix has sort of been given a little bit of a free pass compared to some of the other networks when they cancel things, and I think this one hit quite big.
And it was more like an abandonment, that wasn't it, as opposed to a cancellation.
I'm sure the creators felt like that. Yeah, their statement was quite telling. It opened by saying, COVID killed actual humans. It's a national tragedy, but it also took down our show. But yeah, I think in the light of it, it might have felt like that.
Okay, and what else? What else have you seen?
Two more positive ones to leave you with the top stories. Do you remember Tiger King? It feels like a long time ago that we were all talking about Joe Exotic, but it came out, didn't it? Right at that moment where we were, locked in. Everyone was inside. We weren't seeing friends, and it was a huge hit. Netflix has said one of its biggest documentary series. But what will be really interesting to see next year is what's next, essentially. There's two big scripted series based on Joe Exotic, based on Tiger King. Nick Cage is in one of them. That's one that's going to be it's in development at Amazon. He's not really done TV before, so and he's a fascinating character. And then Kate McKinnon, the SNL star, is in another one. This one's NBC Universal, Peacock, and so forth. But she's going to play Carol Baskin. Whether they both make it to air, I don't know. But we might not have seen the last of Joe Exotic.
And Nicolas Cage, he was there's also rumoured to be developing some kind of swearing show, isn't there? Did I read somewhere?
Yeah, it's coming to Netflix in January. History of Swear Words, which will be his first TV show. It's a bit of a comedy. It's a bit of a short form. I say short form, not quite a Quibi, but shorter episodes. Sort of fun. I think the release might have said it was docu-comedy. He's sort of sitting there by a fireplace talking about history of swear words. So no, look, it might be Nick Cage's year next year. He's a slightly odd chap, isn't he?
Look forward to that. I love a bit of Nick Cage, but he's been away for a while, so I'll be welcoming him back with open arms into TV. And how about next year, Pete, in terms of looking towards 2021? I mean, what do you see developing with, the sort of key developments in US TV over the next year?
It's interesting you say. We sort of already know, really, given how long scripted takes to make it to screen, what might be next year and even into 2022. It certainly has felt during the pandemic that development has kept going, and we've written more and more stories about projects and so forth. There's obviously more and more platforms, so we sort of have a bit of an idea. I think the big shows, and these aren't necessarily developments, these are things that are being produced and so forth. I think Lord of the Rings is going to be a huge one. I really think that might be a standout moment for Amazon. They obviously have to get it right, and I think a lot of those fans will be paying close attention to that. But I think that might be the big Amazon show if they do get it right. That's they've now installed the casting for that. It's got a 2-season order. Don't necessarily know all of the details. We sort of know Robert Aramayo is playing Beldor, who's thought to be the lead. But I think that's going to be a very big one for 2021. In that vein, I mean, there was a Disney presentation last week, a 4-hour presentation.
Yeah, it's amazing. That was amazing. The announcements were just, I mean, it was literally like a content arms race. I mean, it was extraordinary what they came out with. The number of movies and TV series across all of their huge brands was stunning.
We had a team of 8 journalists covering that, and we were all exhausted by the number of stories we wrote. And from the TV side, and in that sort of fantasy space, across they announced Star Wars and Marvel, you're going to have around 10 TV series each. So, from Marvel, you've got Loki, WandaVision, Falcon and Winter Soldier and more. Star Wars, you've got an Obi-Wan Kenobi show, you've got a Lando Calrissian show, Andor. So, yeah, they kept coming. And I don't necessarily think we might see 1 or 2 of them in 2021. But, this is obviously a pipeline similar to how Disney does its movies with quite a long lead time. So I think, the fantasy genre, the superheroes, the anything in that sci-fi world, I think that's, continuing to be big. And similarly on that note, it probably is more like 2022, but, a Game of Thrones prequel. You've got House of the Dragon coming. They started casting on that. Paddy Considine, Matt Smith, Olivia Cook, they're all going to be in that one, which apparently is 300 years before the events of Game of Thrones. So, add that to the list, and I think sci-fi fans, or certainly fans of genre, are going to be pretty well stocked for the foreseeable future. One that there's a couple I hear more to tell you about. I really like the look of Mr. Mayo. It's coming up in January. It's a network show, and it's for NBC. It's got Ted Danson in it and Holly Hunter. But it sort of feels like it might be in that 30 Rock vein. And I think what certainly network television is crying out for is something that people, that catches a bit of the zeitgeist. American broadcast network comedies tend to be very multicam and a bit safe. So Mr. Mayor does feel like it's in that sort of Parks and Rec, 30 Rock, maybe the Steve Carell's version of The Office. So hopefully that will do well. Shonda Rhimes, she's got what sort of appears to be her first sort of quote-unquote premium show through her Netflix deal called Inventing Anna, which is basically a story about a grifter or a fake heiress, Anna Delvey. Julia Garner from Ozark is going to play the scammer. But, obviously Shonda Rhimes is best known for the sort of ABC soapy shows, Grey's Anatomy and the like. And she's got Bridgerton, which is a period drama. But, I think this might be one that, gets a bit of buzz. That's probably coming in 2021. So there's all that. And then I can't leave you without my favorite, something I grew up on, which, talking of reboots, is a new version of Beavis and Butthead. So, look, we could, you and I could probably do quite good impressions of that.
Yeah. I mean, this is the big reboot that I've been waiting for.
Well, now the thing I really want to know, and they haven't really given too many details, is obviously Beavers and Butthead for me was about the characters, but it was also about the videos, wasn't it? It was about them talking about the latest Metallica or Slayer or Nirvana video. So I'd be curious to see how they do that and whether we get some headbanging out of it.
Yeah, well, I hope so. I mean, music TV, I mean, it kind of still does exist, but, it's all about YouTube, isn't it? It's all about social media and bands, really releasing their videos on social media. So I'm sure there'll be lots of nods to that, but I can't wait for that. And that's obviously going to be coming out on
MTV, essentially. Whether it actually airs on MTV, the channel, or one of the streaming services within that isn't quite clear. But you can imagine it's within the Viacom CBS world. What is it? Paramount Plus is their streaming service that they're rebranding to next year. So we'll see some hopefully Cornelio and the gang back next year.
Yeah, well, I actually have to admit, I mean, I've been Googling recently, Beavis and Butthead. Where do you see it? Where do I see it? But it's not. It's certainly I couldn't find it anywhere. That is a reboot that's music to my ears. So we've got Amazon, we've got HBO, we've got, I think it's NBC. We've got Viacom, and you mentioned Netflix as well with the Shonda Rhimes. So it's going to be a pretty big year, isn't it, for TV? Certainly, as you say, some of these may move into 2022 with some of the Disney ones you mentioned. But it's all of this development has also been bottled up as well, you'd imagine. So there's going to be lots of commissions to talk about, presumably in 2021.
It will be, yeah, absolutely. I think, as I said, there's been a huge amount of development, whether that turns into series orders. I think the biggest thing now is whether these things can all get shooting. Certainly over here in LA, things are shooting, but a lot of them are shutting down for a couple of weeks here and there. Next year, we'll see, there might even be quite a bit of a bottleneck, really. I think that might be an issue for many of the broadcasters. Scheduling, we've already seen one or two cases where people have had to pull out of projects because, they were meant to be shooting it over the summer or such and such. So, there'll be a lot of telly. That's one thing that I don't think people have to worry about.
Invest in a studio. The studios are already bursting to capacity, I gather, and they can't build them quickly enough in the UK. So that's probably somewhere to invest your money.
The television adaptation of TellyCast, Justin, given what's going on in the podcast world. So hopefully you'll be announcing that soon.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And who do you want to play you, Pete?
No comment.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'll leave that with the listeners to maybe make some suggestions. But Peter, it's been brilliant speaking to you all throughout this year and the crazy ups and downs. Mainly downs, really, of the pandemic. But, it's been fascinating for you to be reporting back and covering what's happening in LA and obviously the TV's biggest market in the world. So it's been really interesting. And we look forward to more of the same in 2021.
Always happy to chat.
So once again, for the last time in 2020, we're going over to Riga to speak with Girts Licis from K7 Media. How are you, Gert? How's the frozen wastes of Riga right now?
Hi, Justin. Hi, everyone. We are having the darkest day today. It's somehow with a nature that they said that evenings are going to start becoming lighter by some seconds already tomorrow, but mornings are still going to get darker.
That doesn't make sense to me, Gus. That sounds far too complicated.
No, it's quite complicated, but people will still watch telly.
I think we're going towards the winter equinox in the UK, and it's the same for everywhere in Europe. Anyway, well, welcome to the show, as always, Girts. What are we going to be talking about this week?
Today I'm going to look at some of the strategies which are helping the local players to stand their ground against global streamers. And I thought it would be particularly interesting to review this in light of announcements of the three major British broadcasters, first ITV, then Channel 4, and finally from BBC last week, just within a month or so. Each of them coming up with different strategies with pretty much one goal: to establish their online video services at the core of their future product offering, finally.
Yeah, it's about time, isn't it?
Yeah, it's definitely about time. And on the other hand, to be fair, just a little more than a year ago, analyzing the ambitions behind strategies of global companies, some which already had made their move, others at that time just planning to enter the online video space, even most of those saw the streaming services as secondary to their core business. For instance, bundlers like Amazon or Apple see video as a tool to deliver as much premium viewing as possible. AT&T wants to deliver and own as much premium viewing as possible. Premium networks like Stars or Showtime see it as a way to earn incremental role in viewers' video diets, while such incrementalists as NBC Universal and AMC were looking forward to growing their share of viewers' video time and building direct-to-consumer relationships. Interestingly, Disney was the only company openly stating that online video was going to become the new core of the Walt Disney Company. And I think the results we are seeing now, just a year after the launch of Disney Plus, show the importance of setting a clear direction.
Incredibly important for them as well, as their cruise liners and their theme parks have been shuttered. It's more important than ever for them, but it's a remarkable success they've had.
Yeah, absolutely. So back to the weaponry, what the local players have at their hands. With a good old SWOT analysis in mind, where do the strengths and opportunities of locals lie? In knowing well their own markets and audiences, having an established customer base, that infrastructure, and using those in their advantage. But there is one more very important factor, and that is speed of action. That's where I think many locals have failed so far, possibly by underestimating the global competition.
Meaning decisions have been too slow and coming too late?
I can share my own experience since I happened to work at the Swedish MPG group at the time when, as early as in 2012, the company appointed a specific member of staff, a project manager, researcher, who was sent on a fixed-term mission to LA with a single goal: to gather a full picture of what was brewing in the US in terms of streaming, infiltrating, researching, gathering information, and reporting it back to the HQ on a regular basis, thus making sure that the company's strategies had a solid ground for making some timely and at that time quite unpopular decisions. For instance, already I think it was 2015 when MTG's SVOD service Viaplay launched the production of its first original drama projects, which many may have thought was a suicidal move. And over the time, Viaplay has increased this output of originals to approximately already 40 titles per year. And as a result, it has not only remained the second most popular VOD platform in the Nordic region with constant growth of its client base, but it's currently actually the Europe-originated VOD service with the most subscribers, and is now even gearing up for extensive international expansion, not only across Europe, but also to US. If we are talking about traditional broadcasting, in many markets we see redirecting the resources towards the local productions. And this is particularly apparent among networks which are running a portfolio of multiple channels. Their flagship channels are increasingly becoming acquisitions-free, with foreign programming pushed out of prime time into late night and daytime slots, while the foreign programming is still providing a strong and reliant source for their secondary channels. But with streaming services gradually expanding their genre horizons, I think that event television remains one of the strongest fortresses in the offering of linear channels. Exclusive live shows, as well as non-live recorded shows with event feel, those which contain unmissable moments, shows which are particularly fun watching together, with family, with friends, and which are triggering debate, the talk of the town. This is still one area where traditional broadcasting prevails. Various surveys show that in many territories, co-viewing as an experience is much more popular on linear TV than streaming. Even more so, this difference increases with the growing size of co-viewing groups. For instance, in UK, 34% of viewers acknowledge that they have been watching shows on streaming services together with one other person, while the same experience has been confirmed by 48% of viewers of linear TV. However, almost twice as many viewers are likely to watch programming together on linear TV in groups of 3 or more people than watching together shows on streaming services, which interestingly tend to be much more of an individual experience.
That's backed up by I'm a Celebrity, which is ITV's biggest show of 2020. An average of 11 million viewers watching across the series, which is still pretty impressive. So viewers prefer building alliances on a living room sofa watching telly. But what about broadcaster alliances in fighting these global invaders, these global digital invaders?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Because another common strategy local broadcasters have been using is creating these alliances of scale. Here we can talk about different aspects of the business, from the joint commissioning of programming to the launch of collaborative distribution platforms. For instance, one commissioning example is an initiative called Nordic 12. I'm again talking about Nordics. This is an alliance of broadcasters of the 5 Nordic countries, triggered by the need of having a bigger volume of quality Nordic drama throughout the year. And the commissioners were also not very happy that they would not know in advance if the partners would join in a co-production or not. They needed earlier commitment to lift the projects. And most importantly, they would be frustrated about the short licensing period, making high-end product available for only 1 month on their digital broadcasters' catch-up platforms after the closing episode on linear TV. And as a result, Nordic 12 was established, and now 12 Nordic projects are commissioned annually, 3 from Sweden, Denmark, and Norway each, and 2 from Finland and 1 from Iceland. They're co-financed by the podcasters of the 5 countries and made available for 12 months without restrictions to all 5 participating broadcasters, with each network retaining exclusive domestic linear and also digital rights. There is no joint commissioning panel. The genres and content are, of course, discussed, but all decisions are made in each territory locally, with everybody else accepting each local head of drama's curated choice.
I've often wondered how that worked, actually. And there has to be an enormous trust between those broadcasters in each other.
It's a democracy as well. On distribution front, obviously, we increasingly see platforms scaled up as language or regional bundles, like the same BritBox focusing on British content, or Salto on the French content, for instance. And then another way to scale up, particularly when it comes to high-end big-budget productions, is, of course, making frenemies, that is, forming partnerships with third parties, which would, in classic terms, so to speak, be regarded as fierce competition and therefore considered impossible to collaborate with per se. At some point pre-COVID, up to 56% of European Netflix and Amazon original shows, including countries like UK, Spain, Denmark, and the Netherlands, were co-produced with local broadcasters. And in such co-production models, streaming platforms typically get rest of the world rights in exchange for partial funding. But the question is whether broadcasters are getting a good deal from these arrangements. It's not a secret that broadcasters are usually bearing the majority of the costs, up to 75% of the total budget. And another risk for broadcasters to be considered when using the strategy is that channeling their audiences to the streaming platforms, they may be cannibalizing their own viewing figures, particularly among older and more conservative viewers who can start changing their habits too.
And how about production? Is production talent feeling comfortable changing their habits too?
When it comes to production, one golden coin many broadcasters are still holding is the financial terms with producers and talent. While the expectations of producers may differ, of course, many are used to generous participation in backend, particularly in long-established creativity exporting markets. Many streamers, on the other hand, are pushing for rights buyout from creators instead. Therefore, the fact that streamers are looking to hold on to IP can prove a key trump card for traditional broadcasters who allow producers more generous rights deals. In the UK, for example, Channel 4 recently agreed a new rights deal with producers, with a broadcaster relinquishing its share of secondary international revenues in return for greater freedom to exploit programs across its platforms in the UK.
We're seeing that as well, aren't we, in the US at the moment with HBO Max and a lot of Hollywood getting pretty upset about what HBO Max is doing right now in terms of all the Warner product that's going to go next year. And obviously talent and all the back end is going to be disappearing for everybody, all the talent involved in those shows, presumably.
That's a good point. Well, and then finally, in many major markets, the legislators are trying to establish a fairer playing field, which should see the globals tied to the same rules that apply to the local players. We see such initiatives in making from Australia to South Africa to Canada, And of course, also in the EU, where according to the legislation, 30% of a platform's content has to be European. However, EU's directives are not legally binding. Each EU nation must individually interpret these guidelines in its own laws. So in France, for instance, according to the new law from January of the next year, the SVOD platforms will have to join other broadcasters in having to spend 25% of their turnover in France on European productions, with a large, yet to be determined proportion of that going towards French productions in particular. But what the skeptics of such formal rulings say, though, is that there are certain risks. One risk is that the quotas would be achieved by just downsizing the catalogs, which would obviously hurt consumers by taking away choice from them. Or that the new rules could also further inflate production costs, with broadcasters and streaming platforms spending lavish sums on top talent just to meet these quotas.
Do we expect to see those sort of quotas coming in other territories across Europe and around the world, do you think, in the coming months and years?
Yeah, there definitely, like I said, there is this kind of umbrella ruling in EU, and so definitely other European countries like Germany or Italy are also looking into this, and probably I think we can expect it also in other places.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out in the UK as well. Obviously now, UK finally will be leaving the European Union, we think, with some sort of deal, or not. Who knows? Girts, thank you so much for coming on the show today and all your other appearances in 2020. I've really enjoyed having you on the show. Thank you so much. Wrap up warm and look forward to the daylight when it finally reappears.
Yeah, absolutely. I must say it's been super exciting to be part of this journey with you as well so far. And obviously, it's been a tough year for many of us. But like I have been stressing many times here, it's important to see through the opportunities, even when the times are tough. And that's something I think I wish all the TellyCast listeners in the new year as well, to find their silver lining and capitalize on that.
Absolutely. I'll always know you as the eternal optimist, Girts.
Yeah.
All right. Well, take care. Have a fantastic Christmas.
Thank you.
Break, and all the best for 2021.
All the best. Bye-bye.
And once again, it's time to welcome our wellbeing coach, Tracy Forsyth, to the show. How are you, Tracy?
I'm very well, Justin. I'm looking forward to Christmas and looking forward to that lovely Christmas dinner, sitting around, eating chocolates, etc., etc. How about you?
Same here. There's going to be a period of inactivity, I think, in my household. But yeah, just looking forward to turning off the emails a little bit and, no more Zoom calls for a couple of weeks. Vegging out, really, I think.
Yeah, some much needed relaxation, let's call it that. Self-care.
Definitely. So what are we talking about on the last episode of TellyCast this year?
Because it was the holiday season, I thought I would do my very own festive 12 days of Christmas wellbeing tips.
Excellent.
All right, so brilliant. So 12 days of wellbeing tips for the Christmas and holiday period. So my number one tip is to breathe. So we've done breathing many times before on my segments, but I just want you to take a deep breath this Christmas and sigh it all out. What a year we have had. So deep breaths in and sigh it all out. So breathe. My second tip is to pause. So you've talked about relaxation and just sort of vegging out. Well, there is nothing wrong with that. So pause. Just press the pause button. Just really sort of relax. Put your feet up. More of that later, actually. But pause. Time for the whole world to stop a little bit, if you can. My third one is to process what has gone on. We've had all kinds of turmoil this year. We've had good and bad. And if you are still particularly stressed out, if you are stressed out by this end of the year and what's going to happen next year, then my advice is just to really get in touch with yourself and process what you're feeling, as if all those thoughts and anxieties are a knotted ball of threads. Just spend time this Christmas sort of just kind of trying to unravel those threads. And even if you can't sort them out straight away, just acknowledge what is going on inside. My fourth tip is to hydrate. I know it's very, very tempting to drink lots and lots at Christmas, and I'm not going to say don't, but make sure you hydrate with something of the non-alcoholic variety as well. So hydrate, hydrate, hydrate. It makes you feel a lot better. My fifth point is to stretch it out. You know, when you wake up in the morning and you open your eyes, you can begin stretching. So give yourself a full body stretch in the morning before you've even got out of bed. You can twist from side to side in bed, just stretch it out. So, and once you're up and dancing, figuratively speaking, or maybe not figuratively speaking, make sure you stretch it out throughout the day. And I know that when we're not at work, even though we might have closed down the laptop, there's a big, big temptation to spend loads and loads of time on our smartphones. So we will still probably be hunched over those little smartphones. So whatever you do, if you're going to do that, and I will be doing that myself a little bit, make sure you stretch it out, stretch those shoulders, stretch that neck, etc., etc. Don't forget to stretch. Number 6 is to move. Now, whichever way you like to, you can move it. If you like to dance, you can walk, you can run, you can cycle, you can swim, you can do yoga, whatever it is, just make sure you do some moving. Number 7 brings me on neatly to this is nature. Get out there, get out, have a walk, look at the sky, hug a tree. People call it forest bathing now. I actually did. I've got a dog, so I walk my dog every day. But the other day I did actually hug a tree, and it actually looked good. It was an enormous tree. I thought, I'm just going to do it. My arms couldn't fit all the way around it. I gazed up at it and thought, wow, this tree's been here much, much longer than me, and will probably be here much after I've gone. But hug a tree. Nature is really, really nourishing. And no matter what the weather, remember what they say, you know, there's no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothes. Hopefully we've got some sunshine. Number 8 was hug a tree. And number 9 is sunshine. Get your vitamin D. Now, hopefully we will have some winter sun. Winter sun is just some of the most the beautiful sun. I think it's like really sparkling sun. Now, listen, today, when I look out the window today, it's really cloudy, etc., etc. But this morning, the sun was there. So I always make it a point that if there is any sun throughout the day in these winter dark days, I do what I can to rearrange my schedule just so that I can get out there in the sunshine and feel it on my face. Number 10. Now, I want you to celebrate. You might not feel like celebrating after the year we've had, but what I do want you to do is celebrate what's gone right. Even if out of 100 things that have gone wrong, if there's only 1 or 2 things that have gone right, remember just to celebrate those. And just celebrate your resilience for having got through this year. Celebrate the fact that you're still standing. Whatever it is, just celebrate. And no matter how tiny it is, I want you to celebrate what's gone right. Number 11 is compassion. Compassion, compassion, compassion. So compassion not only for yourself, but compassion for other people. So we're all maybe going to be cooped up with our families, and some of us are going to think that's a lovely thing. And then sometimes tempers may fray and arguments may happen. But now I think my top tip there is to show compassion for what the other person may be experiencing, count to 10 if you have to, etc., etc., and also show compassion for yourself. My last tip, my 12th tip, is to put your feet up. Now, putting your feet up is a time-honored way of relaxing, but there is method to the madness of putting your feet up. It's not just because you're horizontal, but actually being in that position with your feet above your head is deeply, deeply relaxing. It helps your body slow down. It helps your circulation. If you've been standing or sitting all this year, then it kind of reverses that. Inverting the legs has always been known as a treatment for reducing swollen feet and legs. Number 12 is to put your feet up. And on that note, I wish you a lovely, lovely holiday period. Look after yourselves, and I will see you, or I will speak to you in the new year.
That's fantastic, Tracy. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. And I think there's some great tips there for everybody, all of them. And who can argue with any of those? And I particularly like the tree hugging. And I read, I think, that they've found that trees can actually communicate with each other.
True. Yes, exactly. So they might, you know what, they might appreciate a hug, and then they can say to the next tree, this crazy human keeps hugging me. Yeah. It does feel good. It does feel good. Hug a tree.
Yeah, fantastic. Tracy, thank you so much. Again, have a great holiday period yourself. We look forward to having you on the show again in the new year. Relax, have a great break, and we'll see you in January.
Thank you, Justin. You too.
Well, that's about it for the last show of 2020. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to rate and subscribe to TellyCast and share it with friends and colleagues. We've started a new free newsletter called TellyCast Plus. We aim to make it the most useful thing coming into your inbox every Friday. It'll be packed with interesting TV industry stories of the week you may have missed, jobs news, execs available for hire, Tracy's tip of the week, and more insight and opinion you can shake a stick at. And it's all completely free. Just visit our website to sign up at www.telecast-podcast.com. That's telecast-podcast.com. And there's a link in the description of the podcast as well. TellyCast was edited by Ian Chambers. Our next show comes out on Thursday, 7th of January. But if you can't wait that long, why not have a delve back through our previous 38 shows to catch up on any you may have missed? So it just remains for me to say have a fantastic Christmas and a very happy New Year. It's a great chance to reflect, refresh, and get ready for 2021, which I'm sure is going to be another exciting year of huge change in the TV world. And it won't be long until we all meet up together again in person and remind ourselves why we're so lucky to work in this fantastic, creative and fast-moving industry. So, until then, very Merry Christmas, stay safe, and see you on the other side.